I sat in the courthouse hallway clutching my secondhand laptop, watching my former boss Marcus Hartwell stride confidently through the doors with his team of expensive lawyers. He spotted me and laughed openly, pointing me out to his attorney. "Look at that," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "She thinks she can take on Hartwell Industries with a garage sale computer." The lawsuit papers crumpled in my sweaty palm as I remembered how this nightmare began 3 months ago when I dared to quit and start my own company. 3 months earlier, I was just Candace Reynolds, a 28-year-old software engineer who had spent the last 4 years of my life building something I believed in at Hartwell Industries. The tech company sat in the heart of Austin, Texas, in one of those gleaming glass buildings that made you feel important just walking through the lobby. I had poured my soul into that place, staying late into countless nights debugging code until my eyes burned and dreaming up innovations that could change how people interacted with artificial intelligence. But somewhere along the way, I had become invisible. Every promotion cycle I watched less qualified candidates advance while my contributions were acknowledged with a pat on the head and a modest cost of living raise. Marcus Hartwell, our 45-year-old CEO, had built his reputation on being a visionary leader. But I was beginning to suspect that vision belonged to other people. The company meeting that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in September. The conference room buzzed with excitement as Marcus prepared to present our latest breakthrough to a group of potential investors from Silicon Valley. I had arrived early, nursing my third cup of coffee and reviewing the quarterly development reports on my tablet. Marcus walked to the front of the room wearing his signature charcoal suit, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, and his smile held just the right amount of warmth to seem approachable while maintaining authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, clicking through a pristine presentation. "Today, I want to show you something that will revolutionize how artificial intelligence learns from human behavior." My stomach dropped as the screen filled with diagrams and code snippets that I recognized immediately. It was my algorithm, the one I had submitted 6 months ago as part of our internal innovation contest. The project had consumed my evenings and weekends for 2 months, a breakthrough in machine learning that could predict user needs with unprecedented accuracy. Marcus explained the technical details with practiced ease, describing how his creation would transform customer experience across multiple industries. The investors leaned forward, clearly impressed by the sophistication of the approach. My hands trembled as I watched him claim credit for work that had cost me countless hours of sleep and creative energy. When he opened the floor for questions, I found my voice before I could lose my nerve. "Excuse me, Marcus, but that algorithm was actually my submission to the innovation contest last March. I have all the development notes and preliminary code on my workstation." The room fell silent. Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his smile tightening at the corners. "Candace, I think you might be confused. You worked on a small component of the user interface module, which was certainly valuable, but the core algorithmic breakthrough was my own development. Sometimes junior engineers can mistake their contributions for the bigger picture." Heat flooded my cheeks as 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. Tommy Chen, my coding partner and the closest thing I had to a friend at work, shot me a warning look from across the table. Janet Brewster, our head of HR, scribbled something in her notepad with sharp, decisive strokes. "I'm not confused," I said, my voice stronger now. "I can prove that algorithm is my work. The coding signature alone would demonstrate." "That's enough," Marcus interrupted, his tone still pleasant but carrying an unmistakable edge. "We can discuss this privately after the presentation. Right now we have guests." The meeting continued, but I barely heard another word. My mind raced through every email, every late-night coding session, every moment of inspiration that had led to that breakthrough. I had documentation timestamps version control records that would prove my authorship beyond any doubt. After the investors left bubbling with enthusiasm about our innovative leadership, I rushed to my workstation to gather evidence. My fingers flew across the keyboard, but something was wrong. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. My project directory's months of work had simply vanished. Having trouble with your computer? Janet's voice behind me made me jump. She stood there with that practiced HR smile, the one that looked sympathetic while revealing nothing. My files are gone, I said. All my work on the behavioral prediction algorithm project. Janet tilted her head slightly, her expression genuinely puzzled. I'm sorry, Candace, but there's no record of you working on any project by that name. You've been assigned to UI development for the customer portal. Perhaps you're thinking of someone else's work. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder as I stared at her. That's impossible. I submitted the complete project documentation in March. Tommy can verify. I'll need to see any evidence you have, Janet said smoothly. But right now I think it would be best if you took the rest of the day to clear your head. Sometimes stress can make us remember things differently than they actually happened. As I gathered my things with numb fingers, Tommy appeared at my desk. He glanced around nervously before leaning close. Meet me at the coffee shop on 6th Street after work, he whispered. There are things you need to know about this place. But not here. The rest of the afternoon crawled by in a haze of disbelief and growing anger. I kept checking my email, searching for any trace of the project files I knew existed. Every search came back empty. It was as if 6 months of my life had been erased with a few keystrokes. Tommy was already waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop, hunched over a corner table with his laptop open. His usually neat appearance looked disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. They've done this before, he said without preamble. Marcus has a system. He identifies employees with innovative ideas, encourages them to share everything in those collaboration sessions, then gradually pushes them out after claiming their work as his own. I sank into the chair across from him, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. How long have you known? About a year. I started noticing patterns after Sarah Martinez got fired. Remember her? The blockchain security expert who supposedly couldn't adapt to our company culture. Tommy's fingers drummed nervously on the table. She created that entire authentication protocol Marcus used to land the government contract. When she tried to speak up suddenly, her performance reviews showed she was difficult to work with and not a team player. Why didn't you tell me? He looked miserable. Because I was scared. I have student loans, Candace. My mom's medical bills. I can't afford to lose this job, and Marcus makes sure everyone knows what happens to people who cross him. As I walked to my car that evening, the Austin skyline sparkled against the darkening sky, but the city I loved felt different now. The technological paradise I had worked so hard to be part of had revealed its true nature. Success wasn't about innovation or hard work. It was about who had the power to rewrite history. But as I drove home to my small apartment, anger began to replace despair. Marcus Hartwell had made one critical mistake. He assumed I would quietly accept his theft, that I would be too intimidated or too naive to fight back. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. I spent the next 2 weeks conducting my own investigation, treating it like the most important debugging project of my life. Every evening after work, I methodically documented everything I could remember about the algorithm development process. I recreated my original notes from memory, outlined my problem-solving approach, and mapped out the technical decisions that made my solution unique. The breakthrough came when I remembered that Tommy had mentioned other victims. If Marcus had done this before, there might be a pattern I could expose. I started with Sarah Martinez, tracking her down through LinkedIn to a smaller tech startup in Denver. Our video call revealed a woman who had clearly been through her own version of hell. Sarah's dark hair was pulled back severely, and her expression held the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "I wondered when someone else would reach out," she said after I explained my situation. "Marcus took my blockchain authentication protocol and used it to secure a $15 million government contract. When I tried to prove it was my work, suddenly my access was revoked, and my employment file showed performance issues that never existed. Do you have any evidence?" Sarah's smile was bitter. "I was smarter than most. I kept backup copies of everything on personal drives. Development logs, email correspondence, even recorded phone calls where Marcus specifically asked me to explain my theoretical approach to blockchain security. I know exactly how he operates." She introduced me to David Park, a current Hartwell employee who had been quietly documenting Marcus's pattern of theft for months. David was a cautious man in his early 40s, soft-spoken, but meticulously organized. He had been watching other talented engineers get pushed out after their innovations were absorbed into company projects. "The key is the collaboration sessions," David explained during a clandestine meeting at a diner outside the city. "Marcus schedules private meetings with innovative employees, claiming he wants to understand their thought processes. He records everything, then gradually incorporates their ideas into larger projects where individual contributions become impossible to trace." "How many people has he done this to?" David consulted a notebook filled with careful handwriting. "At least 8 that I can document. Maybe more who left before I started paying attention. The pattern is always the same. Identify talent, extract knowledge, eliminate the source. My next ally came through Tommy's family connections. His sister Linda was an intellectual property lawyer who had recently started her own practice. When Tommy cautiously mentioned my situation, she agreed to meet with me pro bono, partly out of curiosity and partly because she had encountered similar cases involving small inventors being crushed by larger corporations. Linda Chen was 29 years old with sharp eyes and an impressive educational pedigree, but her office was clearly that of someone still building her practice. Law books were stacked on folding tables, and her desk was a repurposed dining room table covered with case files. "This is more common than you might think," she said after reviewing my documentation. "Large companies systematically exploit individual contributors, especially in tech, where intellectual property boundaries can be deliberately blurred. The challenge is proving original authorship when the company controls all the official records." She explained the legal landscape with clinical precision. Employment contracts typically included intellectual property assignment clauses that gave companies ownership of any work-related innovations. Non-compete agreements could prevent employees from using their knowledge at other companies, effectively trapping them or forcing them to start over in completely different industries. However, Linda continued flipping through my employment contract. "There's something interesting here. This algorithm you developed, when exactly did you create it?" "Between January and March of this year. I submitted the final version on March 15th. Linda's expression brightened. "Your current employment contract, the one with the restrictive IP clauses, wasn't signed until April 10th. If you can prove you developed this innovation before signing the updated agreement, you might have retained some rights. But proving authorship was the challenge. Marcus had systematically eliminated official company records of my involvement. I needed independent evidence that couldn't be altered or deleted. The search for that evidence led me back to the company's older backup systems. Working late one evening, I accessed a legacy server that housed archived project files. Most employees had forgotten about it, but I remembered because I had helped migrate data from it during my first year. My hands shook as I navigated through folders organized by date. There, buried in a March archive, was a complete backup of my project directory. Every file, every iteration, every comment I had made during development. The timestamps were irrefutable, showing clearly that I had been working on the algorithm months before Marcus claimed to have created it. I copied everything to an encrypted drive, but when I tried to access the server again the next day, it showed an error message. Someone had wiped the archive clean. Either Marcus had discovered my investigation, or he routinely eliminated potential evidence as a precaution. The realization that I was being actively monitored sent cold fear down my spine, but it also confirmed that Marcus knew his theft was legally vulnerable. He wouldn't be covering his tracks so thoroughly if he felt secure in his position. That fear turned to determination when Marcus announced the company's plan to go public. At an all-hands meeting, he outlined how Hartwell Industries would be valued at over $200 million, with my stolen algorithm as their flagship innovation. Financial projections showed the AI system could generate $50 million in annual revenue within 3 years. Watching him bask in applause for work that belonged to me, I felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about recognition anymore. Marcus was about to become wealthy beyond imagination by stealing my intellectual property and that of other employees he had exploited. After the meeting, I made a decision that would change everything. I submitted my resignation letter effective in 2 weeks, citing personal reasons. I was going to start my own company and develop AI innovations that would compete directly with Hartwell Industries. Marcus called me into his office within an hour of receiving my resignation. His corner office overlooked downtown Austin with expensive furniture and awards covering every wall. He gestured for me to sit across from his massive mahogany desk, his expression unreadable. "This is unexpected, Candace. I thought you were happy here." "I've learned a lot at Hartwell Industries," I said carefully, "but I think it's time for me to explore other opportunities." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with calculating eyes. "You know, talented people like you are rare. I'd hate to see you struggle trying to make it on your own in such a competitive industry. I appreciate your concern. It's more than concern," he said, his tone shifting subtly. "It's a warning. The non-compete clauses in your employment contract are quite comprehensive. Any AI development work you do could be considered derivative of proprietary knowledge you gained here. That's intellectual property theft, which carries both civil and criminal penalties." The threat was delivered with Marcus's trademark smile, but there was steel underneath it. He was making it clear that he owned not just my past work, but potentially my future as well. "I understand the legal restrictions," I replied. "I plan to work in completely different areas of technology." Marcus's laugh was genuinely amused. "Candace, we both know you're not going to waste your talents on unrelated fields. You're going to try to compete with us using knowledge you developed while employed here, and when you do, I'll have no choice but to protect our intellectual property." I left his office with my hands clenched into fists, but I managed to maintain my composure until I reached the parking garage. Only then did I allow myself to feel the full weight of what he had just communicated. Marcus wasn't content with stealing my past work. He intended to control my future as well. But as I drove home through Austin traffic, I realized he had made a crucial error. By threatening me so explicitly, he had revealed how much he feared legitimate competition. Marcus Hartwell's empire was built on stolen foundations, and he knew it could crumble if the truth came to light. That evening, I called Linda to discuss my options. Her voice was grave as she explained the legal reality I faced. "Non-compete agreements in Texas are enforceable if they're reasonable in scope and duration," she said. "Marcus could argue that any AI work you do is inherently based on proprietary knowledge from Hartwell Industries. Even if you win eventually, the legal costs could destroy you financially. So he gets to steal my work and prevent me from doing anything about it." Not necessarily. These cases often come down to who can prove what and when. If you're determined to fight this, we need to be strategic, and we need to be prepared for a battle. I was prepared. I had spent 4 years helping build Marcus Hartwell's company, and I wasn't about to let him steal my future along with my past. The war was about to begin. My last day at Hartwell Industries arrived with the weight of inevitability. I had spent 2 weeks carefully transferring my legitimate responsibilities while secretly preparing for what would come next. The office felt different now that I knew I was leaving, like I was observing it from outside rather than being part of it. Marcus had been watching me closely during my final weeks, sometimes appearing unexpectedly near my workstation or asking casual questions about my future plans. Janet from HR had scheduled an exit interview that felt more like an interrogation, probing for any hint that I might be planning to compete with the company, but I had decided on a direct approach. Rather than slinking away quietly, I was going to confront Marcus with the truth about what he had done. I had printed copies of the archived files I had discovered, along with detailed technical documentation that proved my authorship of the algorithm. If he wanted a fight, I would give him one. His corner office door was open when I approached during the lunch hour. Marcus was reviewing financial projections on his computer, probably calculating his future wealth from the public offering built on stolen innovations. "Do you have a minute?" I asked, stepping into the doorway. Marcus looked up with that practiced smile. "Of course, Candace. Come in. Close the door behind you." I settled into the chair across from his desk and placed a thick folder of documents between us. "I want to discuss the behavioral prediction algorithm you presented to investors last month." His expression didn't change, but I noticed his fingers pause over the keyboard. "What about it?" "It's my work, Marcus. I have complete development logs, source code iterations, and technical documentation that prove I created that algorithm between January and March of this year." I opened the folder and spread the evidence across his desk. Timestamps, code comments, problem-solving notes written in my handwriting, all demonstrating a clear progression from initial concept to final implementation. Marcus leaned back in his chair, not bothering to examine the documents. "Candace, we've been through this. You worked on a small component of a much larger project. Your contributions were valuable, but they were part of a team effort under my direction. These files show otherwise. This is my intellectual property that was developed on my own time using my own resources. The timestamps prove I created this before signing the updated employment contract with the IP assignment clauses." For the first time, Marcus's composure slipped slightly. His eyes narrowed as he looked at the printed pages, clearly recognizing data that should have been destroyed. "Where did you get these files?" "That's not important. What matters is that they exist, and they prove you've been lying about the algorithm's origins." Marcus stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the city skyline. When he turned around, his expression had hardened into something cold and calculating. "Let me explain something to you, Candace. Ideas are worthless. Implementation is everything. Even if you had some preliminary concepts for artificial intelligence applications, the algorithm that's driving our business forward was developed through company resources, refined through team collaboration, and brought to market through my leadership and vision." He moved closer to his desk, leaning forward with his hands planted flat on the surface. "More importantly, any knowledge you gained while employed here belongs to Hartwell Industries. That includes not just the specific code you wrote, but the methodological approaches, the problem-solving techniques, and the technical insights that made your work possible." "You're stealing my intellectual property." Marcus's laugh was genuinely amused. "I'm protecting my company's investment in your education and development. Every salary dollar we paid you, every training opportunity we provided, every mentor relationship that shaped your thinking, that's all company investment. We own the output." He walked around the desk to stand beside my chair, his proximity clearly intended to intimidate. "But I'm not unreasonable, Candace. You're talented, and I'd hate to see that talent wasted. I'm prepared to offer you a significant promotion, senior engineer level, with a 40% salary increase, plus equity options that could be worth substantial money when we go public." The offer hung in the air between us. It was more money than I had ever imagined, making financial security that would change my life completely. All I had to do was pretend I hadn't seen the truth about how Marcus operated, And if I refuse? Marcus returned to his chair, his expression sympathetic in a way that made my skin crawl. Then you'll leave here with the knowledge that any future work you do in artificial intelligence could be considered derivative of proprietary Hartwell Industries methodologies. The non-compete agreements you signed are quite comprehensive. We've successfully defended them in court multiple times. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a legal folder. In fact, we've already prepared documentation outlining the specific proprietary knowledge you've been exposed to during your employment. If you attempt to use that knowledge at another company or in your own venture, we'll have no choice but to protect our intellectual property through legal action. The documents he showed me were terrifying in their thoroughness. Marcus had anticipated this confrontation and prepared for it. Page after page outlined technical concepts, methodological approaches, and problem-solving frameworks that I had learned or developed while at Hartwell Industries. According to their analysis, virtually anything I might create in AI would inevitably infringe on their intellectual property. This is extortion. This is business, Marcus corrected. I'm giving you the opportunity to be part of something bigger than yourself. We can accomplish great things together, Candace. Or you can throw away your career on a misguided principle that will ultimately accomplish nothing. I gathered my evidence and stood up my decision, crystallizing with absolute clarity. I'll take my chances. Marcus nodded as if he had expected this response. I'm sorry to hear that. I genuinely hoped we could reach a more constructive resolution. As I walked toward the door, his voice stopped me. Candace, you're a brilliant engineer, but you're naive about how the world works. Ideas belong to whoever has the power to implement them. That's not theft. That's capitalism. I turned back to face him one last time. We'll see about that. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending from one world into another. Behind me was the security of a steady paycheck and clear expectations. Ahead was uncertainty, legal danger, and the possibility of financial ruin. But there was also the possibility of justice. That evening, Linda reviewed the legal documents Marcus had shown me. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she read through the claims of proprietary knowledge and trade secret exposure. This is sophisticated, she admitted. They've clearly done this before. The scope of what they claim as proprietary is so broad that it would be difficult for you to work anywhere in AI without potentially infringing. So he wins. Linda looked up from the documents with a fierce expression. He wins if you let him, but there are ways to fight this. It will be expensive, time-consuming, and risky. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Sarah Martinez and all the other talented engineers who had been crushed by Marcus's system. I thought about the algorithm I had created during sleepless nights driven by the desire to solve problems that could help people. I thought about Marcus presenting my work to investors while I sat in that conference room watching him steal my future. I'm prepared. 24 hours later, a process server appeared at my apartment door. Marcus had moved faster than I expected. The lawsuit he filed claimed breach of contract, violation of non-compete agreements, theft of trade secrets, and tortious interference with business relationships. He was demanding $2 million in damages and a permanent injunction that would prevent me from working in artificial intelligence for the rest of my career. As I read through the legal papers, I realized that Marcus Hartwell had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had forced me into a corner where I had nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The battle was officially joined. The law offices of Chen & Associates consisted of 3 small rooms above a Vietnamese restaurant in East Austin, but Linda approached my case with the intensity of a major firm litigator. She had cleared her schedule to focus on fighting Marcus, partly because she believed in the justice of my cause, and partly because she sensed this could be the case that established her reputation. The good news, she said, spreading the lawsuit documents across her makeshift conference table, is that Marcus got overconfident. He's claiming damages that are wildly inflated and legal theories that won't hold up under scrutiny. Linda's analysis was both encouraging and terrifying. Marcus was demanding $2 million based on projected losses from my theft of proprietary knowledge, but his calculations assumed I would somehow replicate Hartwell Industries' entire business model. The non-compete violations he claimed were similarly exaggerated, painting me as a master criminal rather than a former employee starting her own company. The bad news, Linda continued, is that defending against even a frivolous lawsuit is expensive. Marcus knows most individuals can't afford to fight large corporations, so they settle rather than face financial ruin. She had researched Marcus's legal history and discovered a pattern that made my blood run cold. 12 former Hartwell Industries employees had been sued over the past 5 years for various alleged violations of their employment agreements. All 12 cases had been settled out of court with comprehensive gag orders. Not one had gone to trial. He's systematic about it, Linda explained. Identify talent, extract their innovations, push them out, then use legal intimidation to prevent them from competing. The settlements probably cost him less than paying fair royalties for the intellectual property he steals. But there was hope. Linda had contacted several of Marcus's previous victims through mutual professional connections, and some were willing to talk despite their non-disclosure agreements. Their experiences revealed additional patterns that could support our defense. Sarah Martinez agreed to testify about her own experience with Marcus, providing evidence that his theft of intellectual property was systematic rather than isolated to my case. Her blockchain authentication protocol had been stolen using the same methodology Marcus had applied to my algorithm. The technical documentation I kept proves that my work was original and complete before Marcus claimed it, Sarah explained during a strategy meeting at Linda's office. I can demonstrate that he had no understanding of the underlying cryptographic principles. When questioned about implementation details, he couldn't provide coherent explanations. David Park, still employed at Hartwell Industries, but increasingly disgusted by what he had witnessed, agreed to provide testimony about Marcus's internal practices. He had been documenting the pattern of exploitation for months, carefully recording instances where talented employees were systematically robbed of their innovations. Marcus schedules what he calls knowledge transfer sessions with promising engineers, David explained. He records everything, then uses those recordings to claim he directed the development process. The employees think they're being mentored. They're actually being harvested. But our strongest evidence came from an unexpected source. While researching Marcus's background for the case, Linda discovered that his reputation as an innovative leader was built entirely on stolen work going back to his graduate school days. I contacted his former academic advisor at UT, Linda said, her excitement barely contained. Marcus's master's thesis was based on research conducted by a team of graduate students. He was listed as the principal investigator, but the actual work was done by others. The pattern goes back 15 years. Professor Janet Walsh, now retired from the University of Texas, remembered Marcus clearly. Her description of him matched exactly what I had experienced at Hartwell Industries. Marcus was brilliant at identifying promising research and inserting himself into the credit structure, Professor Walsh explained during a video call. He had a gift for convincing people that collaboration with him would advance their careers, then gradually marginalizing their contributions until he appeared to be the sole creator. She still had academic records showing that Marcus's most celebrated graduate research had actually been conceived and executed by a team of international students who lacked the language skills and cultural knowledge to effectively challenge his appropriation of their work. As we built our defense strategy, Linda identified a crucial vulnerability in Marcus's lawsuit. His claims of trade secret theft required him to prove that the knowledge in question was truly proprietary to Hartwell Industries. But if I could demonstrate that my algorithm was based on publicly available research and my own innovations developed outside the company, his entire case would collapse. The discovery phase of litigation gave us access to Hartwell Industries' internal records, and what we found was even worse than I had imagined. Marcus had been systematically documenting his theft of employee innovations, maintaining detailed files on how to legally appropriate intellectual property while minimizing corporate liability. Email threads between Marcus and his legal team revealed a calculated strategy for exploiting talented employees. They identified individuals with high innovation potential, encouraged them to share their ideas through supposedly collaborative processes, then created paper trails showing company ownership of the resulting intellectual property. One email from Marcus to his attorney was particularly damning. The key is making them feel like partners in the development process, while ensuring that all documentation shows company control and direction. Individual contributors should appear to be implementing our vision rather than creating their own. But Marcus was fighting back aggressively. His attorney Harrison Beck was a specialist in corporate litigation known for destroying individual defendants through relentless legal pressure. Beck's strategy was to bury us in paperwork and procedural motions while driving up our legal costs to unsustainable levels. Within 2 weeks, we were drowning in document requests, deposition schedules, and motion filings. Beck demanded access to my personal computer's financial records and communications going back 5 years. Every request was designed to be invasive and expensive to fulfill. The financial pressure was crushing. Linda was working pro bono, but court fees, expert witness costs, and document production expenses were rapidly depleting my savings. I was forced to move in with my sister, sell my car, and take a part-time job waiting tables to survive while the case proceeded. The emotional toll was equally devastating. Tommy stopped speaking to me after Marcus made it clear that continued association with me would jeopardize his employment. Other colleagues from Hartwell Industries avoided me at industry events, afraid of being contaminated by my rebellion against the company. This is exactly what Marcus wants, Linda reminded me during particularly dark moments. He's trying to break your will to fight. Most people give up at this stage because the personal cost becomes unbearable, but then came a development that changed everything. During a deposition, Harrison Beck introduced what he claimed was definitive proof of my guilt. He produced archived code samples that allegedly showed my algorithm contained proprietary elements from a previous Hartwell Industries project, predating my employment by 2 years. The code was sophisticated and clearly related to my work, but I had never seen it before. According to Beck's timeline, I must have somehow accessed this earlier project and incorporated its methodology into my own algorithm. The evidence suggested I was not an innocent victim, but a calculating thief who had been planning to steal company intellectual property from the moment I was hired. Linda studied the code samples with a growing frown. This is technically possible, she admitted. If this earlier project existed and contained these elements, it would seriously damage our case. Marcus would have a legitimate claim that your work was derivative. But I never saw this code before today, I insisted. I developed my algorithm from scratch based on my own research and publicly available methodologies. Then how do we explain these similarities? The question hung between us like a death sentence. If we couldn't prove that Marcus had somehow fabricated this evidence, my case was effectively over. But Linda's expression suddenly shifted as she examined the metadata on the archived files. Wait, she said, her voice sharp with excitement. Look at these timestamps. This is impossible. The files Beck had produced showed modification dates that post-dated my algorithm development by several months. Someone had retroactively created historical evidence to frame me, but they had made a crucial technical error in the process. Marcus planted this evidence, Linda said with certainty. He created fake archive files to support his theft of your intellectual property. This isn't just corporate bullying anymore, Candace. This is fraud. As the implications sank in, I realized that Marcus Hartwell had just given us the weapon we needed to destroy him. His desperation to win the case had led him to commit crimes that would expose his entire pattern of systematic theft. The hunter had become the hunted, but we still needed to prove our theory, and Marcus had the resources of a major corporation backing his legal team. The real battle was just beginning. The revelation about the fabricated evidence transformed our legal strategy from defensive to offensive, but proving Marcus had committed fraud would require technical expertise beyond what Linda and I could provide. We needed a digital forensics expert who could analyze the archived files and demonstrate definitively that they had been retroactively created. Linda found Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a former FBI cybercrime specialist, who now worked as an independent consultant. Dr. Walsh's reputation was impeccable, and her testimony had been decisive in several high-profile corporate fraud cases. "These files tell a story," Dr. Walsh explained after spending 2 days analyzing the evidence Beck had produced. "But it's not the story Mr. Hartwell wants you to believe." Her technical analysis was devastating to Marcus's case. The metadata showed clear signs of manipulation with creation dates that had been artificially backdated, using sophisticated but detectable techniques. More importantly, the code itself contained subtle references to technologies that hadn't existed at the supposed time of creation. Whoever created these fake archives was technically skilled, but not forensically careful, Dr. Walsh concluded. They assumed that standard legal discovery wouldn't involve deep metadata analysis. They were wrong. But our most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source that I had completely forgotten about. 8 months earlier, frustrated by the lack of recognition for my innovations at Hartwell Industries, I had decided to protect my intellectual property through the patent system. Working late one evening in my apartment, I had filed a provisional patent application for my behavioral prediction algorithm. The provisional patent was basic, just 14 pages of technical description and diagrams, but it carried the full force of federal intellectual property law. More importantly, it provided time-stamped government-verified proof that I had conceived and developed the algorithm entirely on my own months before Marcus claimed to have created it. "This changes everything," Linda said, her voice tight with excitement as she reviewed the patent documentation. "Not only does this prove your authorship, but it shows that Marcus has been knowingly infringing on your patent for months. He's been marketing and profiting from your legally protected intellectual property without license or permission." The patent filing also revealed something that made Marcus's position untenable. In my technical description, I had included several unique methodological approaches that were specific to my problem-solving style. Those same approaches appeared in Marcus's supposedly original work, proving that he had not just seen my algorithm, but had studied it carefully enough to understand its underlying principles. "Patent infringement carries treble damages," Linda explained. "If we can prove willful infringement, Marcus could be liable for 3 times the actual damages. Given the revenue projections for Hartwell Industries' public offering, we're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. But our legal offensive required more than technical evidence. We needed to demonstrate that Marcus's theft of intellectual property was systematic and intentional rather than an isolated misunderstanding. Sarah Martinez provided crucial testimony about her own experience, but we needed additional witnesses to establish a clear pattern. The breakthrough came when David Park finally decided he could no longer remain silent. The stress of watching Marcus systematically exploit his colleagues had been eating away at his conscience for months, and our discovery of the patent infringement gave him the courage to act. "I have recordings," he revealed during a clandestine meeting at a diner outside Austin. "Marcus requires all knowledge transfer sessions to be recorded for quality assurance purposes. I've been copying those files for documentation purposes." David's archive contained hours of audio recordings, showing Marcus systematically extracting technical knowledge from innovative employees through supposedly mentoring conversations. The recordings revealed his technique in devastating detail. In session after session, Marcus would ask leading questions designed to get employees to explain their technical approaches in detail. He would probe for underlying methodologies, challenge them to defend their design decisions, and encourage them to think through alternative implementations. The employees, believing they were receiving valuable mentoring from their CEO, provided complete tutorials on their innovative work. The beautiful thing about artificial intelligence, Marcus could be heard saying in one recording with a young engineer named Patricia Holmes, is that the real innovation happens at the conceptual level. Once you understand the underlying logic, the implementation becomes almost trivial. Patricia's voice responded with obvious pride. That's exactly what I discovered with the predictive modeling approach. The key insight was realizing that user behavior patterns could be analyzed using modified clustering algorithms. 3 months later, Patricia was fired for performance issues, and her predictive modeling innovation became part of Hartwell Industries' core technology platform. But our most damaging evidence came from Marcus himself. David had recorded a strategy meeting where Marcus outlined his approach to intellectual property development with frightening candor. The key to staying competitive, Marcus explained to his management team, is recognizing that our most valuable resource is the intellectual capital of our employees. We need to systematically extract that capital while maintaining legal ownership of the innovations. The recording continued with Marcus describing specific techniques for appropriating employee innovations while minimizing legal liability. He spoke about the importance of documentation, showing company control the value of collaboration sessions that blurred individual contributions, and the effectiveness of non-compete agreements in preventing displaced innovators from competing. Individual engineers think their ideas have value, Marcus said with audible amusement. But ideas without implementation infrastructure are worthless. We provide the infrastructure. We own the value. Linda's expression was grim as she listened to the recordings. This is evidence of systematic fraud and theft. Marcus isn't just infringing on your patent. He's been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a technology company. With this evidence in hand, we filed countercharges against Marcus for patent infringement, fraudulent business practices, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The case had transformed from Marcus attacking me to me attacking his entire business model. The timing couldn't have been worse for Marcus. Hartwell Industries was in the final stages of preparing for their public offering, and the company's valuation was heavily dependent on their portfolio of supposedly proprietary innovations. A patent infringement lawsuit claiming that their flagship technology was stolen intellectual property threatened to destroy the entire IPO. But Marcus wasn't finished fighting. The evening before our crucial court hearing, I received a call from Harrison Beck, offering a settlement that took my breath away. Mr. Hartwell is prepared to resolve this matter quickly and generously, Beck said in his smooth attorney voice. He's willing to drop all claims against you and pay $500,000 in settlement, plus a perpetual license to your patent for an additional $200,000 annually. All you need to do is assign your patent rights to Hartwell Industries and sign a comprehensive confidentiality agreement. $700,000 a year to pretend I had never seen the truth about Marcus Hartwell. Financial security beyond anything I had ever imagined, all in exchange for legitimizing his theft and enabling him to continue exploiting other talented engineers. I need to discuss this with my attorney, I said carefully. Of course, but I should mention that this offer expires at midnight tonight. Mr. Hartwell believes in moving quickly when opportunities arise. After I hung up, Linda and I sat in her small office analyzing the implications of the settlement offer. It was more money than either of us had expected, enough to set me up for life and fund Linda's practice for years to come. It's also proof that Marcus is terrified, Linda observed. He wouldn't offer this much money unless he knew his position was legally untenable. The patent infringement case alone could cost him hundreds of millions in damages. But accepting the settlement would mean abandoning Sarah Martinez, Patricia Holmes, and all the other talented engineers Marcus had exploited. It would mean letting him continue his systematic theft of intellectual property, secure in the knowledge that even his victims could be bought if the price was high enough. More importantly, I realized that Marcus's offer revealed something crucial about his state of mind. He was desperate enough to pay almost $1 million to make this case disappear, which meant he knew something we didn't about the scope of his legal exposure. That's when Linda discovered the real reason for Marcus's panic. While researching the company's public offering documents, she found references to an FBI investigation into Hartwell Industries for securities fraud. The government was examining whether the company had misrepresented the origins of their core technologies to potential investors. If the FBI proves that Marcus built his company on stolen intellectual property, the securities fraud charges could put him in federal prison for decades, Linda explained. Our case isn't just about your algorithm anymore, Candace. It's about exposing a pattern of systematic fraud that could bring down his entire operation. As midnight approached and Beck's settlement offer expired, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to take Marcus's money. I was going to take him down. The next morning, we would walk into federal court and put Marcus Hartwell's entire criminal enterprise on trial. Justice was finally within reach. The federal courthouse in Austin was imposing in the early morning light, its limestone facade radiating the authority of the justice system I was about to put to the test. I sat on a bench outside the building, clutching my secondhand laptop and trying to calm my nerves before the hearing that would determine my future. Marcus arrived precisely at 8:30, his convoy of black SUVs pulling up to the courthouse steps like a presidential motorcade. He emerged wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit flanked by Harrison Beck and 3 other attorneys carrying expensive leather briefcases. The contrast with my single folder of documents couldn't have been more stark. He spotted me immediately and walked over with that signature confidence, his legal team trailing behind him like well-dressed bodyguards. "Candace," he said with apparent warmth, "I have to admire your persistence. Not many people would choose financial ruin over a generous settlement offer. Not many people would build a company on stolen intellectual property," I replied. Marcus laughed as if I had told an amusing joke. "You still don't understand how the world works. Innovation happens through collaboration and institutional support. Individual contributors like you are just components in a larger system." Harrison Beck stepped forward with practiced authority. "Ms. Reynolds, my client has been more than generous in trying to resolve this matter. Your refusal to accept reasonable terms has forced us to pursue this case to its conclusion." "You mean the conclusion where a federal judge reviews evidence of systematic patent infringement and fraud?" Linda had appeared beside me carrying her own laptop and a single box of files. Beck's smile was condescending. "Ms. Chen, I respect your enthusiasm, but this case will be decided on legal merit, not emotional appeals. Your client has no realistic chance of prevailing against established precedent regarding employee intellectual property obligations." As we walked through the courthouse security, I could feel the weight of media attention. Word had leaked about the case, and technology reporters from major publications were already setting up in the courtroom. The story of a former employee challenging a major corporation over stolen innovation had captured public imagination. Judge Patricia Williams presided from her bench with the gravitas of someone who had been handling complex federal cases for over 20 years. Her reputation for fairness was matched by her intolerance for legal gamesmanship and both sides knew that she would focus on facts rather than theatrics. The courtroom was divided into clear camps. Marcus's side featured a battalion of attorneys, corporate executives, and expert witnesses all wearing expensive suits and radiating confidence. My side consisted of Linda, me Sarah Martinez, David Park, and Dr. Walsh looking like David facing Goliath. Harrison Beck opened with a masterful presentation that portrayed Marcus as a visionary leader protecting his life's work from a disgruntled former employee. He described Hartwell Industries as a collaborative environment where individual contributions were shaped and refined through institutional expertise. Mr. Hartwell created the infrastructure, provided the resources, and directed the development process that made Ms. Reynolds' technical contributions possible, Beck argued. Without his leadership and the company's institutional knowledge, her work would have remained an academic exercise with no practical application. Beck's strategy was to minimize my role in the algorithm's development, while emphasizing Marcus's creative direction and business acumen. He presented employment contracts, project documentation, and witness testimony suggesting that I had been part of a team effort rather than an individual innovator. The evidence will show that Ms. Reynolds was a capable engineer who made valuable contributions to a larger project, Beck continued. But her current claims represent a fundamental misunderstanding of how collaborative innovation actually works in modern technology companies. When Linda rose to present our opening argument, the difference in resources and experience was obvious. She lacked Beck's polished delivery and expensive visual aids, but her sincerity was unmistakable. Your Honor, this case is about theft, Linda began simply. Not the subtle appropriation of ideas that can happen in collaborative environments, but systematic, deliberate theft of intellectual property that was legally protected and clearly documented. Linda outlined our evidence methodically, the provisional patent that proved my independent development of the algorithm, the technical analysis showing that Marcus couldn't explain his supposedly original work, and the recordings that revealed his systematic exploitation of employee innovations. Mr. Hartwell didn't just steal Ms. Reynolds' algorithm, Linda argued. He built his entire business model on appropriating the intellectual property of talented engineers while using legal intimidation to prevent them from seeking justice. The testimony phase began with Marcus taking the stand, projecting absolute confidence as Beck walked him through his background and achievements. Marcus described his vision for artificial intelligence applications, his leadership philosophy, and his role in developing the disputed algorithm. But Linda's cross-examination revealed the hollowness behind his confident facade. When she asked specific technical questions about the algorithm's implementation, Marcus struggled to provide coherent answers. Mr. Hartwell, can you explain why you chose a recursive clustering approach for the behavioral pattern analysis component? Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the technical details. The recursive approach was optimal for the data structures we were working with. Optimal in what sense? What were the specific computational advantages you were seeking to achieve? Well, the recursive methodology provided. It gave us better performance characteristics for the analytical framework. Linda pressed harder, asking about specific code optimizations, algorithmic trade-offs, and implementation decisions that any actual developer would understand intimately. Marcus's responses became increasingly vague and defensive, revealing that he had no deep understanding of work he claimed to have created. When I took the stand, Linda guided me through a detailed explanation of my algorithm's development process. I described every technical decision, every problem I had solved, every innovation that made my approach unique. The difference between my intimate knowledge and Marcus's superficial understanding was undeniable. Ms. Reynolds, did you receive any direction or assistance from Mr. Hartwell during your development of this algorithm? None whatsoever. I worked on it independently using my own time and resources based on problems I had identified in existing artificial intelligence methodologies. Linda introduced my provisional patent application, showing the federal timestamp that proved my independent creation of the disputed technology. She played recordings of Marcus systematically extracting technical knowledge from employees through fake mentoring sessions. She presented Dr. Walsh's forensic analysis, proving that evidence against me had been fabricated. But our most powerful moment came when Linda introduced the recording of Marcus explaining his intellectual property theft strategy to his management team. The courtroom fell silent as Marcus's voice filled the space. Individual engineers think their ideas have value, but ideas without implementation infrastructure are worthless. We provide the infrastructure. We own the value. I watched Marcus's face as his own words condemned him. For the first time since I had known him, his confidence cracked. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Harrison Beck's redirect testimony tried to rehabilitate Marcus's image, but the damage was irreversible. The recordings had revealed his true character, and the technical testimony had exposed his fundamental lack of understanding about work he claimed as his own. Then came the moment that would be reported in technology publications for years to come. Just as Beck was attempting to discredit my patent application as somehow fraudulent federal agents entered the courtroom with official documentation. "Your Honor," the lead agent announced, "we have a warrant to seize business records from Hartwell Industries as part of an ongoing federal investigation into securities fraud and wire fraud related to misrepresentation of intellectual property ownership." The timing wasn't coincidental. The FBI had been building their case for months, and our civil litigation had provided crucial evidence for their criminal investigation. Marcus wasn't just facing a patent infringement lawsuit. He was facing potential federal prison time for systematic fraud. Judge Williams called for a brief recess as the implications became clear. When court resumed, Marcus's legal team looked shaken. Beck requested a continuance, claiming they needed time to address the new federal investigation, but Judge Williams denied the motion. "This court will proceed based on the evidence presented," she ruled. "The existence of a parallel criminal investigation doesn't change the civil claims before me today." As closing arguments began, I realized that Marcus Hartwell's empire was collapsing around him. The man who had stolen my innovation and threatened to destroy my career was about to face justice on multiple fronts. But the most satisfying moment was still to come. When Judge Williams asked if I had any final statement to make, I stood and looked directly at Marcus for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Your Honor, 8 months ago, I was just another engineer trying to solve problems and build something meaningful. Mr. Hartwell taught me that innovation without integrity is just theft with better marketing. I'm grateful for that lesson, even though it cost me more than I ever imagined it would." Judge Williams nodded and called for a brief recess before rendering her decision. As we waited in the hallway, Linda squeezed my hand with quiet confidence. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you've already won. Marcus will never be able to steal from another engineer without thinking about this day." But I knew we had done more than just win a legal victory. We had exposed a system of exploitation that extended far beyond one corrupt CEO. The ripple effects would be felt throughout the technology industry for years to come. When Judge Williams called us back into the courtroom to announce her decision, Marcus Hartwell's confident smile had finally vanished completely. Judge Williams returned to the bench with the bearing of someone who had reached a decision that would reshape the lives of everyone in her courtroom. The silence was absolute as she reviewed her notes one final time before speaking. "In 30 years of jurisprudence, I have rarely encountered a case that so clearly demonstrates systematic intellectual property theft disguised as corporate collaboration." She began, her voice carrying the full authority of federal law. "The evidence presented reveals a pattern of exploitation that goes far beyond simple employment disputes. Marcus sat rigidly in his chair, his complexion pale as Judge Williams continued her analysis. The confident executive who had entered the courthouse that morning had been replaced by a man watching his entire world crumble. Mr. Hartwell's inability to explain the technical details of work he claims to have created, combined with Ms. Reynolds's demonstrated expertise and federally documented patent application, makes the issue of authorship unambiguous, Judge Williams stated. Furthermore, the audio recordings and fabricated evidence reveal a deliberate pattern of fraud that cannot be excused as legitimate business practices. She ruled comprehensively in my favor, granting the permanent injunction that prevented Marcus from using my algorithm and awarding damages for patent infringement that totaled $12 million based on Hartwell Industries' projected revenues. The punitive damages alone exceeded the company's cash reserves, effectively ending their planned public offering. But the legal victory was only the beginning of Marcus's downfall. Within hours of the court ruling, the FBI executed search warrants at Hartwell Industries offices across Texas, seizing computers, financial records, and documentation related to their intellectual property claims. The federal investigation that had been building quietly for months became front-page news across the technology industry. The securities fraud charges that followed were devastating. Federal prosecutors demonstrated that Marcus had knowingly misrepresented the origins of Hartwell Industries' core technologies to potential investors, inflating the company's valuation based on stolen intellectual property. The wire fraud counts related to his systematic theft from employees added additional years to his potential prison sentence. Within 6 weeks, Hartwell Industries declared bankruptcy. The company's assets were liquidated to pay legal judgments and creditor claims, leaving Marcus personally liable for millions in additional damages. His reputation as a technology visionary was replaced by notoriety as one of the most brazen intellectual property thieves in Silicon Valley history. But my victory extended far beyond financial compensation. The media coverage of our case sparked a broader conversation about intellectual property rights in the technology industry. Employment lawyers began scrutinizing non-compete agreements more carefully, and innovative engineers gained legal precedents they could use to protect their own work. Sarah Martinez, David Park, and 6 other former Hartwell Industries employees filed their own lawsuits based on evidence that emerged during our case. The pattern of systematic exploitation that Marcus had perfected over decades became the foundation for multiple successful claims that ultimately cost him everything he had stolen. Tommy, who had initially been too frightened to support me, became one of my first business partners after Hartwell Industries collapsed. His coding expertise complemented my algorithmic innovations perfectly, and his guilt over abandoning me during the legal battle motivated him to work harder than I had ever seen. "I should have spoken up from the beginning," he told me during one of our early strategy sessions in my new office. "Watching Marcus destroy you taught me that silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit in the crime." Linda's law practice grew exponentially as word spread about our victory over corporate intellectual property theft. She specialized in representing individual innovators against large corporations, using the legal precedents from our case to level the playing field for talented engineers who had been exploited. "Your case changed how intellectual property law is practiced in technology disputes," she explained during a celebration dinner 6 months after the trial. "Companies can't just claim ownership of employee innovations anymore without providing substantial evidence of their actual contributions to the development process." My own company, Reynolds AI Solutions, became profitable within its first year of operation. The publicity from the court case attracted clients who specifically wanted to work with someone who had proven her integrity under pressure. Major pharmaceutical companies licensed my behavioral prediction algorithms for drug research applications and healthcare systems used modified versions to improve patient care protocols. But the most satisfying development came when the FBI's investigation expanded to include other technology companies with similar exploitation practices. Marcus's recorded strategy sessions became evidence in multiple federal cases, leading to prosecutions of executives who had built their careers on stolen intellectual property. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensics expert who had proven Marcus fabricated evidence against me, was retained by the FBI as a consultant on technology fraud cases. Her methodology for detecting retroactively created files became standard practice in federal cybercrime investigations. Marcus made a crucial error when he tried to frame you with fake evidence, she explained during an interview for a technology publication. He assumed that civil litigation wouldn't involve the kind of deep forensic analysis we use in criminal cases. His desperation to win ultimately provided the evidence needed to convict him. The personal transformation was equally profound. The naive engineer who had trusted her employer to recognize and reward innovation had been replaced by someone who understood that integrity required constant vigilance. I established a legal defense fund for inventors facing corporate theft, providing resources for talented individuals who couldn't afford to fight major corporations alone. Marcus Hartwell was ultimately sentenced to 14 years in federal prison for securities fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion related to his systematic theft of intellectual property. The judge specifically noted that his exploitation of talented employees represented a betrayal of trust that damaged the entire technology innovation ecosystem. Mr. Hartwell perverted the collaborative nature of technological development into a criminal enterprise, the sentencing judge observed. His actions not only harmed individual victims, but threatened the intellectual property protections that incentivize innovation across our economy. Standing in my new office 18 months after that terrifying day in federal court, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from a cubicle at Hartwell Industries to running my own successful company. The wall behind my desk displayed my patents, my engineering degree, and a framed copy of Judge Williams's ruling. But the most meaningful item was a simple photo of my legal team celebrating after our victory. The scared young woman who had sat in that courthouse hallway clutching her secondhand laptop had discovered that justice was possible when good people refused to accept corruption. The legal system wasn't perfect, but it could still protect individual rights against institutional power when the evidence was clear and the advocates were determined. My algorithm, the innovation that Marcus had tried to steal, became the foundation for medical research that helped millions of patients receive more personalized treatment. The work I had done during those late nights at my kitchen table, driven by nothing more than curiosity and a desire to solve problems, had ultimately contributed to human welfare in ways I had never imagined possible. The lesson I learned wasn't just about intellectual property law or corporate corruption. It was about the importance of fighting for principles even when the odds seemed impossible. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against systematic injustice is simply refusing to accept that injustice as normal. As I worked late one evening putting finishing touches on a new algorithm that could revolutionize emergency medical response times, I realized that Marcus Hartwell had ultimately done me a favor. His theft had forced me to fight for my principles, and that fight had made me stronger than I ever could have become in the comfortable safety of corporate employment. The laptop I was using was still secondhand, bought with my own money rather than provided by a corporation, but the work I was doing belonged completely to me. The patents bore my name, the innovations reflected my vision, and the success or failure would be determined by my own efforts rather than someone else's willingness to give me credit. That sense of ownership, both legal and personal, was worth more than any salary Marcus Hartwell could have paid me to stay silent. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between financial security and standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own difficult decision about integrity versus convenience. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about people who fought against injustice and won. Share this with anyone you know who might be facing workplace exploitation or intellectual property theft. Together, we can create a culture where innovation is respected and protected. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that your ideas and innovations have value that no one can steal if you're willing to fight for them. Stay strong, stay creative, and never let anyone convince you that their power makes your principles irrelevant.